Good evening. But we did have to make a change in the run. The last episode I announced I was going to have Nantu Mikasa, South Africa here. She is the first female woman to run 7 marathons, 7 continents, 7 days all over the world. She just completed this in the schedule so I can have a good quality interview with her, not compromise the internet connection. So tonight, and with all going on, it is very, very different for everybody. And there seems to be a lot of confusion on what's right, what's wrong, what's safe to do, what's not safe to do. So I would like to add a couple of episodes into my podcast series that are going to talk about or talk with some professionals to kind of give some clarity around what's the. I'm right here in Utica from the Passalacqua and Associates LLC. He is an attorney here locally. I know you have you've received some awards. I kind of did a little reading up on you, and I'm glad that you've agreed to come on tonight and talk about this. And basically, how the government is restricting us and what seems to be bizarre, what's necessary, what's not, and kind of get to the bottom of it. So thanks for coming on, Nick. What's going on. So we can take it more serious because we have an understanding. Sometimes it's scary like this. It's maybe feel a little bit better or more comfortable about the decisions that are being made or decisions that we're making. So I saw your post restrict us. And, when you read it like that, it's like, whoa, like, no one's restricting me, but like, what's happening right now?
Team had put together that blog post. I really can't take much credit for it. The other 2 attorneys in my firm, Chris Hamline, Chico, really authored that jointly. Restrictions can be put in place, and the flip side of how and when can that be enforced. And then I helped kind of meld those two you saw, but those guys really had carried the weight in drafting of that blog post, which I think came out really, really well. And that many people don't really understand or don't understand the significance of anyways, or the application on citizens, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the big questions that we're always asked is, well, what if I just say down? What if I, don't stand 6 feet away from people at the store or what have you? Like, what can they do to me? And it's the executive laws in New York state that anyone found to be disobeying an exec B misdemeanor. Okay, so we know it's a criminal conviction potentially if you're found to violate order, but what's the potential sentence? There's really literally no guidance as to what potential sanctions, sentences, impositions under New York State's penal law. A Class B misdemeanor can have no more than 90 days in county jail and fines associated with that. In the neighborhood of maybe $200 or so. Here, they can undoubtedly, what we've seen in some of our research and talking with some of our colleagues in our own state, is that some of these fines that they're threatening, like to restaurant owners when this first started and they weren't shutting down, to $10,000 fine.
Mm-hmm.
And the kind of the catch-22 the government finds themselves is that they set these guidelines essentially, or these orders that certain people are to act and businesses are to conduct themselves in certain ways, if conducting business at all. People understand the significance and the reasons behind it so that they do it, because the government really doesn't want to come in and assess an additional financial hardship on a business of now you have to pay this $1,000 fine, right?
Sure.
That's not their intention. With traditionally, criminal violations, or like, let's say, the ABC laws, alcohol beverage control laws, and stuff, you would impose and sanction and penalize people for that to dissuade that behavior, right? Here, they're hoping that the significance of everything that's going on, along with this order, will be enough for these people to take the appropriate action or inaction, right? Mm-hmm. They don't really want to come in and say, gotcha, here's $10,000 fine. It's kind of just hanging there like, come on, don't make that,
Yeah.
but we don't really see a lot of it in these when people do disobey it because of that. Because, the government, one side of the, how do you then justify coming in and these people are not shutting down because they'll go bankrupt, and now we're going to hit them with a $10,000 fine on top of it,
Yeah.
So it's there. The penalties are real, they're unclear as to what they are or could be. Very real if the government chose to step in and impose them.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah. So, I mean, if you're familiar, let's talk a little bit about what exactly. So, essential being, the business is an essential business, but I work by myself, and I completely, I don't have contact with the general public because I see clients virtually. I didn't do that. I did that before, but I also had my brick and mortar space where I saw clients in my office all the time, sometimes multiple people if I was dealing with a couple, or even if they brought their children in, so business. And I don't think there's clarity around if you have a sole, one person working for a company, that you can still conduct business as long as you're not in contact with other people. Sure. I don't think there's clarity around that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, essential businesses and essential workers really is more so directed at those industries that they articulated clearly, right? Healthcare, pharmacies, things like that, right? I'm sure there's some on the list that are completely not essential. But as we can see, even, what was it, Friday? I mean, that list is changing. He just changed construction work essential to now non-essential, unless it's finishing an essential project or for an essential business. So there's some gray area there too. I know I read an article from the Syracuse Builders Exchange that a lot of the members of that exchange open arms because it's very unclear as to whether their project would qualify, if it's a solo contractor running his own shop, working in a vacant space, what's the issue there, type of a deal, it just happened Friday. So basically, their board is kind of saying, tread caution, because we don't really know exactly by this, even though they just changed the classification. But yeah, and you're not going to see anybody coming in and shutting down a solo attorney who's going to his office, who has no reason to have contact with the public. It's no difference from that person walking out to their garage, essentially, and working in their office in their garage, right? Unless you're in a joint office building and you got 30 solo people coming at the same time. Obviously, that creates an issue.
Yeah. So that does then. So even if you're in a building, but your space is confined to yourself, that would be considered more.
It can, because potentially there can be more than 5 people congregated in the lobby, or and from a practical standpoint, I mean, it's just not smart. You're gonna have 30 people in and out, touching the doorknobs, touching the elevator. From a practical standpoint, that's just not ideal. From a physical distancing theory, to achieve those ends. But like, for instance, myself, and we've been working remotely. This is our 3rd full week that my entire staff has been working remotely, set up at home. We're live answering our phones. All of our phones are digital. So we can do that. We can return calls from our office line, right from our cell phone. We're all set up. We do all of our firm meetings via Zoom like this. And our content management software is all cloud-based and real-time, and has internal messaging and tasking and phone messages and things like that. So, and we've been set up like that for a while. And so when this all hit, I mean, we kind of got out in front of it the best we could. But for instance, if I wanted to go down to the office, no one else is in my building. It's my building. I'm the only person there. There can be some argument against it. I understand that. And I'm not doing that for the most part. I'll go down and check the mail once or twice a week. But from a physical distancing to achieve those ends, there's no conflict there in all reality. I mean, provided I don't make any other stops along the way, get in my car and go there and come back. Then you're not going to see anybody coming in and shutting that type of operation down. If we were having our full staff of 5 or 6 people in meeting clients, that's a big issue.
Yeah.
That's not smart.
Yeah. So one of the things you say that was stated in the ad or the blog, sorry, the phrases like state of emergency, shelter in place, social distancing, and curfews. What do they mean, and how can they be enforced? So let's talk about what those things mean, because I feel like quarantine is a word we're joking around a lot. We're saying it, but to me, quarantine, even I said it, I posted a video of my son like singing Christmas music, and I'm like, Merry quarantine, because I feel like we're in this. But quarantine almost, to me, it's more isolated than what's actually being expected of us. Quarantine would be somebody who's actually ill, who is separated from the family, versus social distancing, physical distancing. Let's talk about those terms.
Yeah, quarantine, the true application of that term would be more so someone who's tested positive in a medical setting and is basically isolated, like you said. The self-quarantine, they're hoping that you take necessary precautions, stay inside and such, but it's not regulated. No one's checking on them. No one's confirming. That's part of the issue. Obviously, the other issue with some of this stuff is testing and finding out who is and who isn't, because it's such a long incubation period and sometimes completely asymptomatic. But that's another story. But yeah, quarantine is being used very liberally surrounding this. But they're using it, I think, again, to try and instill that feeling of isolation. Like that's how they want people to interpret and visualize what they're asking them to do. Like isolate yourself at home, quarantine yourself at home, and it's more of a powerful word, than just stay home. It achieves that goal more so for making the impression on the public when they're trying to persuade them to act that way.
Sure. So, martial law, you see all these people just hysteria, to a certain level of about martial law. Let's talk about martial law. What is martial law? Times maybe when it's been used, and now at this point, where does the government have to draw the line to say, okay, it's time for us to protect the public versus just scare people with words?
Yeah, martial law was being thrown around a little bit more so in the beginning with when there was a bit more of the fear mongering going on. I honestly can't think of a time when it was used in recent history. It's really when they come in with military and shut things down, like physically, like nothing goes on. Mm-hmm. And I know there was some talk of them sending in like National Guard in certain areas. The reason for that at this stage of the game would be more so to prevent looting. Mm-hmm. When these businesses are closed down, think about big retail chains that are closed down. They have security in place, but then people who are going to be of that mindset to loot or rob places are not going to think like, oh, maybe they're going to think maybe the police are working at a shorter staff too, or what have you. You know what I mean? That's at this stage in the game, what would be more the intent of bringing in that National Guard or any other type of military presence would be in larger commercial retail areas to prevent looting and things like that, for public safety and to protect the assets of those businesses. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But yeah, like we said in our article, there has to be specific guidelines that the government has to at least cite when even taking the steps they've taken already. And something that's not being talked about that's in the law that we cite in our blog is that these closures of businesses like restaurants and such really can only be for 5-day periods under the law. Mm-hmm. And they can be extended for 5-day periods throughout the course of the state of emergency, but technically they have to be, those closures have to be renewed by the governor every 5 days, according to the law, which we haven't heard anything about since he closed down the restaurants and everything else. And nobody mentioned that. Well, I'm doing it for 5 days. Under the law, I only have 5 days. Never mentions that, but technically speaking, because if he did bring it up, on that 5th day, all the restaurant bar owners would be kicking down people's doors saying, well, what's happening? We're opening back up. We didn't hear he's extending it, Mm-hmm. So they leave it vague and ambiguous on purpose when they're announcing these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because I actually have a voicemail today from the liquor board. My former business from my marriage is still half in my name. And they called today that they had heard that the business was still open, and which is not true, but it was really interesting that I should play it actually. I think I can, without putting the phone number up there, but let me see if I can. Oh, hold on. Maybe not.
This is John Meyer calling from the New York State Liquor Authority. Please give me a call when you get a chance. My phone number is 315.
Okay, I don't want to play his phone number, but yeah. Yeah. And then he proceeds to say, I just need to call and talk to you about a quick complaint that I got in regarding to such and such business. And I thought that was really interesting. It was so laid back, and it was a quick phone call. Like, oh, are you guys open? Like, no, but yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine that they're getting inundated with a number of different complaints like that. Not and as shady as it sounds, you can almost guarantee some of this stuff is like competition based, unfortunately.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like some competitor, whether they actually heard it or not, is going to report people for things just to add another wrench in the mix, for that person, another complexity, another hurdle for them to overcome in this whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we were kind of talking really quick off the line here about being a landlord. There's a lot of landlords out there that, if your tenants didn't lose their jobs, they should be paying rent and having integrity through this process. I feel like there's a lot of people that are going to really struggle at this time. And if you do have your income, it's not fair to just take advantage of the laws they've put in place for those who will struggle. So there's
a lot of everything. The thing is, I've listened to a podcast earlier today, I think it was, and it was very interesting. It was Simon Sinek, if you know who Simon is, author of like 4 or 5 books. And it was interesting, his perspective on it, which I kind of agree with. We're not really in unprecedented times, right? Like there's been time and again where things happen, whether it be an economic change, a health crisis, the emergence of a completely new aspect of life, like the internet, that shut businesses down entirely, right? I mean, the advent of the internet shut businesses down entirely. The advent of Amazon has shut businesses down entirely. Uber is shutting down taxi cab companies entirely. But why? Not because of Uber, it's because those taxi cab companies that are folding aren't thinking outside the box and changing the way they're doing things in order to compete, right?
Yeah.
So we in terms of an economic crisis like this, it's unprecedented in that it's more of a widespread across all markets, but it's not as though it's these type of things have never happened before. Yeah. And there's, in my opinion, there's really 2 ways to see this whole thing. You see this as a crisis and a big screw job and the biggest, economic downturn and crash to everybody's way of life for, memorable history, right? As long as anybody can remember. Or you can see this as a real pain in the ass, but an incredible opportunity, which is the way I choose to see it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the fact of the matter is, the people that shelter in place mentally are never going to get out of this. You know what I mean? But if you can see the opportunity here, and I'm not talking about, profiteering, buying 1,000 bottles of Purell hand sanitizer and selling them on eBay. But I mean, there's going to be businesses that thrive here just by nature of their business. Look at Zoom. We're using Zoom right now. Yeah. If you bought Zoom 2 months ago, you've doubled your money already. Their stock has gone from like $60 to $160 in 2 months, because of this. There's going to be businesses that still thrive because of the change in the way people do things, not because of a tanking and someone doing poorly elsewhere, just because of the nature of their business, right? So I think people just need to start thinking differently, right? The way we used to do a number of things is gone. Like it's over for the most part.
For sure.
Even as we phase out of this, and so, I think the more people can look and see the opportunity that is presented here, the better, you know, from a mental standpoint, from a regrowth out of this, for turning it around. You know what I mean? Like we were talking about the landlord stuff. I was saying, you know, I invest heavily in real estate, buying and selling and rehabbing and selling and things like that. And I've got 2 projects going on right now, you know, that started just before this all really came about, you know, and I could sit here and be like, oh my God, this is the worst thing that could have happened. And I see it as an opportunity because, you know, there was a chance that with where I was in those projects that I would miss the peak market in real estate. And the market's been very hot and everything. And I said, wow, you know what? This puts the market on pause, allows me to catch up.
Yeah.
You know, I've seen the opportunity to be able to catch up to the market now. It's not like people are going to stop buying houses because of this. I know people that are still closing on new houses in the middle of this.
Yeah.
You know, you have to see the opportunity. It's all about the mindset you have in this thing, in my opinion, you know? Yeah. And, you know, I just think, you know, it's providing a lot of opportunity on a number of different fronts, you know, just for me, like it's showing me a lot of time to be introspective, you know, how much time now that I have here at home with the kids, you know, as frustrating as it can be at times, but also to think about my team has been probably as productive the last 3 weeks working remotely as we have when we were in the office for 8 hours a day. Because think about it, none of my staff were sitting at their computers for 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
And they're not now. I'm not saying they are now, but I think they realize now that the time they spend sitting in front of their computer and doing work, they're doing work. Mm-hmm. They're getting after it. You know, they're putting in much more efficient and effective time. And I think as we transition out of it, that's something that will follow us. You know, when we get to string a couple hours together in front of our computer, I think that we as a business and as a firm and as individuals are going to find that we use that time much more efficiently after this experience.
For sure.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I feel it's really forcing us to be creative. It's kind of exciting to think how many people who are creative thinkers are home thinking of something right now because they're being forced to face their creativity versus kind of do something else to avoid it. But I used this analogy recently about, you know, in nature, if a tree was in a position where it wasn't getting towards the sun, it would kind of bend and twist and make sure that it was going to reach the sun. And there was a good example last year I saw in the Hudson Valley. We were whitewater rafting. Cedar trees actually grew downwards from the side of the cliffs to get the reflection of the sun in the water. And how normal it is to adjust to sustain life because that's what they envision they need, right? And humans, I think we kind of get too emotional, not logical, you know, and we either go one way or the other. We can't really.
And we get stuck in our ways. And so many people get stuck in routine and in their comfort zone and they resist change. Yeah. Like as if change itself is going to be the death of them. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like change is the natural evolution. Like if you're the same person tomorrow as you were yesterday, then something's wrong and you're dying, you know, in my opinion. If I'm not changing and growing, then I'm dying. You know, that's why I think we've been able to, like, yes, we've had a slowdown in new client intakes, but we've got still plenty of work we're doing. We're getting creative in other things, you know, with some of our marketing stuff and just outreach, you know, like we've been calling current, even former clients, just checking in, nothing to do with the business at all and what we're doing for them. Mm-hmm. Just to say, hey, how are you doing right now? Things are crazy. Is there anything you need help with? Not that we can necessarily help with all of it, but we represent a number of different people across all walks of life. If we can't help you, we probably know somebody who we can put you in touch with, right? You've got a leaky roof and you can't get somebody to come over. We may know a solo handyman contractor that can come on a day when you can step out so no one's interacting and help fix your roof. You know, we might be able to put you in with a supplier for this if you're having an issue with that. You know, we've been just reaching out saying, hey, what are you having issues with? Because if we can't help you, maybe we can put you in touch with someone that can.
Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely.
So, you know, and that's some, you know, because a lot of people are just panicking and kind of like folding up, like, well, I'll have to wait this out and going in hibernation mode, you know, and thinking that things are just going to go back to normal. They're not. They're not ever going to go back to normal. They're not ever. You're never going to see the same world that we saw before we entered this whole quarantine crisis. It's not going to happen. You know. So those people are going to be way behind the 8 ball. You know, versus those that are in it and accepting it for what it is, but trying to learn how to grow through it.
Absolutely. You know? Adjusting the sails to according to what curveball you've been handed. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Going back to that little article, it reminded me, even you touch on the situation in Rochester in the mid 2000s when they tries to impose a curfew. So we're going back to like the government talk, right?
Yep.
It was funny because one of the things that I've noticed, you know, just connecting with family again, you know, we always touch with family, but I feel like my conversations have been a lot longer. I seem to have a little bit more time to like hear them, you know, not like, oh, gotta go, you know. My grandmother, she's 92, that in World War II, there were a lot of things that we're seeing now implemented at that time, such as curfews. And my family had a lot of time on the shore in the summer, and they had to black out the streetlights, so the shoreline wasn't lit up. And so she's sharing some of these experiences. I thought that was really interesting. So I share that with you now to kind of encourage, if there's anyone watching tonight, to reach out to your grandparents. If you know anyone that was alive in that era, it's really neat to hear them talk about that, because this happened. And I've been saying, you know, this is something that's different, unique to our lifetime, you know, that anyone alive really hasn't ever experienced something like this. But really, there have been times when this was a major issue.
Right, you know? Right. And we're seeing glimpses of that. I mean, locally, they ordered, they're not being told, some of them by their parents, what's going on necessarily fully, or at least the gravity of the situation. So they don't know. Others, sure, they do care, but it's along the same lines of, you know, blacking out the streetlights so you couldn't see the shoreline, which would attract people to go there. It's kind of, you know, so they boarded them up.
Yeah, sure. So I don't know how public safety, you know, kind of like, I should have written it down specifically where this spot was. Basically, you know, because of the situation that's happening, because of the numbers involved, because of the potential hazard, basically everybody, that they can put these laws into place. They can say that this,
sure,
you know, this is what's going to happen. And
I mean, in a different context, I think we cited in there, New Orleans has done it, like around Katrina, people trying to evacuate when it would be unsafe to, number one, from a, you know, physical element out, even if traffic